Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so we have officially arrived at what was Anton Yelchin's favorite episode to record for the entirety of Trollhunters, because not only did he pitch the idea for this episode, but this episode was a lot of fun for him to record and write. And, well, specifically, Aaron Waltz helped write it, but Anton helped pitch the idea for it. Aaron wanted to bring it, and overall, it was just a really fun episode that's all across the board. You can tell they had a lot of fun writing. So, in any case, the episode itself, Hero with 1,000 Faces, is essentially that premise and why Anton liked recording this one so much. Essentially, the plot of this episode is that Jim starts testing out abilities of past troll hunters, and in the process accidentally splits himself into like 9 different people, which is a fun idea for a premise, but in any case, it does also have some interesting revelations to it as well, but we'll get to those. But in any case, well, not so much revelations, but more so like possible discussions for for things that'll happen later down the line. So we'll get to those at the end as per usual. But in any case, the episode starts off with Jim in the Hero's Forge, and he's obviously doing his training, but as we find out that he's in the Hero's Forge, and it's at this point where Vendel comes in with a box full of gemstones, and claims that now that Jim has unlocked the triumvirate stones and figured out how to use the Eclipse armor, he admits that now maybe it will be time to actually test to see if Jim can learn other abilities outside of that, and then proceeds to ask Jim to recite the incantation. And of course, Jim initially starts with the basic one, but it's this point where Vendel does correct him and tells him to say the other one instead. So Jim proceeds to do that. He summons the Eclipse armor, and Vendel takes a moment to admire it, pointing out that in all his years he never thought he'd see the legend actually become real, and admits that this is exactly what the amulet was designed to do. With Vendel going on to explain how the amulet was designed to be malleable so that any control hunter could fight in any way they chose, and explains how it was so that Merlin's champion could essentially fight the darkness in their own way, in ways that Merlin himself did not predict would come to pass. So he admits that it was designed in a way where essentially future-proofing it, so that Merlin's champion would always, have a way to fight. And I think that's a cool idea. Like the idea that Merlin realized that he couldn't predict everything, so he was just like, here's a device that you can pick and choose what abilities you have, and you can just do that. So essentially, and I do like the idea that at which point it does start actually exploring said powers. It's at this point where it's revealed that what Vendel has in the little box he's carrying is a box full of gemstones, and the gemstones, he explains, are all various elements on the periodic table, claiming that the one that the humans know is just a little bit outdated. And it's at this point where they also proceed to use some sort of projector thing to demonstrate this point, and Jim, seeing all the various possibilities for his daylight armor, then points out that he would be more than willing to learn. At which point, Vendel does point out that all of the gems in the box that he carries are gems used by past troll hunters. He explains that each one are essentially the ones that they were most well known for, and the ones that they were, that he thinks would possibly be useful to Jim, including the ability to walk in daylight, which Jim admits he probably isn't going to need anytime soon, which of course we'll get to that. That's a big thing from the final arc of the series, but Essentially, Vendel, after realizing that Jim probably is right and that he's probably not going to need it, does point out that maybe Jim will get use out of some of the other ones. At which point we do see specifically we see one previous ability from Aragnac the Agile, who had the ability to walk on walls thanks to his gemstone, and I should mention was also an ancestor of Blinky. I will mention that, but in any case, just briefly. But in any case, Aragnac the Agile used the stone that Jim is currently using in this particular section to walk on walls, with Blinky adding that as long as Jim maintains his concentration, he should be fine. But of course, Blinky trying to talk to Jim breaks Jim's concentration and he falls off the wall while trying to use the gemstone. So we point out that maybe that gemstone isn't for Jim. At which point they decide to use one for Madrox the Many, which as Vendel explains, used his gemstone to summon the strength of 1,000. And Jim, of course, believes that it's going to give him super strength, so he is more than prepared to, to become super strong. But then we find out that no, that's not how the gem works, and that winds up being the main crux of the episode. We'll get to that in a minute. But of course, they demonstrate the fact that the gem does not work the way they think it's going to work by having Arg give Jim a large boulder to handle, and Jim obviously very physically can't do it. He winds up getting, almost crushed, and Arg has to help him. And of course, at this point where Vendel points out that maybe it might not be a good time for Jim to learn all the different gemstones, pointing out that he seems a little too distracted right now and that they'll have to try again later. And of course, Jim points out that does seem like a good break to actually take in their training. At which point, he leaves the Hero's Forge and he runs into Claire and Toby, who are about to do some training themselves. When of course Claire asks Jim how training was, and Jim just responds that it was kind of brutal and admits that he's barely got out one piece for the most part. And of course Claire points out that she understands that's rough, but then also proceeds to ask Jim if she can ask him something. And of course she proceeds to go on to explain that she wants Jim to come to a cookout that her parents are holding, which of course Jim agrees to go to. At which point Claire continues to talk, explaining that that's just a little formal thing where obviously her mom is a councilwoman and helps run the town, so she holds these cookouts to earn her good graces with prospective voters, and also just do a bit of a meet and greet with all of them, so that they can get to know what she's like as a person, and also kind of sort of what her politics are, so that she can better inform the town of hey, I'm the person you should vote for me. And of course, Jim interrupts her, pointing out that he's already absolutely planning to do it anyway. So of course, Claire is very excited and pulls him into a fierce hug and proceeds to run off. At which point Toby then proceeds to explain that was absolutely huge what Jim just did. And of course, Jim is wondering what exactly he's talking about. And of course, Toby points out that officially, Jim has never actually been called Claire's boyfriend, and points out that that's a large point thing that he's got to be doing is that he's going to be going over to her house to officially meet the parents and get kind of a do-over with them, since obviously they don't like him very much. He's done a couple of things that they don't particularly approve of. Obviously, he's accidentally wrecked their house. He's been a little bit obnoxious with the whole play thing when he thought he was being hunted by a vulture troll. And overall, they just do not like or approve of him. So of course, Toby meets that Jim is essentially getting a second chance to make a first impression, and explains that because of that he's going to absolutely have to be on his best behavior. And of course, Jim realizes that Toby's right. That's he's gotta have that. He starts stressing out about, pointing out that he's worried that he won't make a good first impression on Claire and her parents, and admits that he's a little worried about it. At which point the amulet starts glowing, and of course Toby wonders what's going on, and why the amulet's suddenly responding to Jim's emotional state. But Jim responds that he doesn't really know. He just knows that it's been on the fritz lately. And sure enough, the amulet for lack of a better word, explodes and sends Jim flying into some crates and barrels. And of course, Jim is fine, of course. The amulet protects him from its own self-implosion. But, and of course, Toby immediately wanders over to where Jim is and wonders if and asks him if he's okay. And Jim eventually does pick himself up, but also notes that he doesn't fully understand what just happened. But it's at this point where the amulet starts glowing again, and Jim quickly realizes, and Jim and Toby quickly realizes that Jim needs to take it off before it goes off again. So he does that, puts it in his pocket, and with a kind of a game plan in place where Jim is going to go to the party on time and make a good first impression with Claire's folks. He leaves while Toby runs off to go train with his warhammer, and of course, at this point where as he's leaving, he walks by Droll, who gives him a hearty hello, at which point we see a glow coming from the barrels that Jim crashed into. And it's this point where we meet Love-Struck Jim, which is what I'm going to call him, because Love-Struck Jim, and this is where the interesting thing of the episode is, Love-Struck Jim is Jim, but he's overly obsessed with Claire and believes her to be the most perfect, beautiful thing in the whole world. So, and of course, he's a very lovey-dovey person. You can probably tell by the name, but he's essentially just embodies Jim's love of Claire. And by that extension, she's just full of love and loves everything, regardless of what it is. So, it's at this point where he then proceeds to walk by Droll, who is obviously very confused to be seeing Jim again, saying that he just saw and greeted Jim. But of course, at this point, where Love-Struck Jim wonders where fair Claire is and wonders where she wandered off to. At which point, Bagdwella shows up and admits that she just left. At which point, Love-Struck Jim goes to find him, admitting that nothing is more important to him in the entire world, and that he wishes to be the best boyfriend that he can possibly be. At which point, he wanders off. And Droll and Bagdwella, having seen that entire exchange, are a little confused as to what happened, but Bagdwella admits that she used to be full of that kind of love once. At which point, Droll just awkwardly shuffles away when she kind of makes goo-goo eyes at him. So very funny little gag. But in any case, it is at this point where it actually cuts to the basement of what is it? The changing Janus order place, to the Janus order. But in case it's revealed that in the interim, since they found out Gunmar had gotten out, what is it? We found out that Otto has actually built a replica of his Gunmar's throne in the basement. So they admit that, and of course, Gunmar is obviously not particularly happy to be surrounded by changelings, admitting that he doesn't feel that he wishes he had some real food, mentioning that he can't very well eat changelings because according to himself, they don't smell good. Which, I mean, obviously it's a bit of a quote unquote racism thing, because the whole changelings are both humans and trolls, so therefore they're neither. So, and obviously we've already established that Gunmar and his son did not treat the impures very well. Which is hence why they refer to him as impures. But of course, at this point where obviously Otto points out that he anticipated that Gunmar would be hungry after his long imprisonment, so he gives him something to feast on. At which point he pulls out the Hearthstone staff that he swindled off the Team Trollhunter away from Vendel. And of course, Gunmar is in awe about the fact that Otto was able to procure actual living Hearthstone. And when of course Dictatius hears that Otto had procured living Hearthstone, he's a little confused. He's a little surprised that Otto was able to get his hands on some of it. But of course, Otto proceeds to hand Gunmar the staff and tells him to use it to restore his full strength. At which point, Gunmar proceeds to drain it dry until it goes from its usual purple to reddish color to a dull gray. And I mean that he needs more than just a taste. Does insist that he needs to get the real thing. At which point Otto agrees, and And of course, does admit that they'll have to formulate some sort of plan so that they don't wind up like Gunmar's son, which of course causes Dictatious to become angry at Otto, pointing out that he shouldn't speak ill of Gunmar's son in front of him. But of course, Gunmar partially agrees, admitting that while he does love his son, he also understands that his son was impulsive and likes to go in half-cocked. So he openly admits that Otto may have a point. And of course, it's at this point where of course Dictatious ejects the idea of the plan that Otto is trying to propose, pointing out that Otto essentially wants to find a way to hand Gunmar Troll Market instead of him taking it over by force. Which of course, again, Dictatious objects to this plan, but Gunmar of course decides to hear Otto out, asking him in his own words how he predicts that Troll Market will fall, and of course. And it's at this point where we actually get a cut over to Claire's house, and and obviously everybody's in the backyard, grilling. Obviously, and what we find out is that apparently, apparently Claire's mom has ordered her dad to cook tofu foods on his grill, which he is vehemently against, claiming that no lesser meat product is going to even touch his grill. But of course, Claire's insisting that he has to, and of course, and pointing out that it's mom's orders, and it's at this point where Councilwoman Nunez does walk over to her husband, pointing out that it's for allergy reasons, obviously. And obviously, meaning that not everybody can eat and with Claire pointing out that not everybody can like chorizo, but of course he's insistent. But of course, her dad is insisting that everybody likes chorizo. So he sits. But ultimately, when his wife tells him that he kind of has no choice, he ultimately relents and puts the tofu on his grill, even though he admits that he's not particularly happy about it. So in case it is at this point where it's this point where Love-Struck Jim appears at the party, almost kind of a little bit early, and of course they point out that they don't see him at first because he just arrives, but they do want. But of course she does admit that Claire does admit that Jim will be there any second, and her dad of course does express that he's not particularly comfortable with Jim being around his house again, after, almost accidentally causing problems and issues with it the last time he was there. But of course, Claire just insists that Jim is very apologetic about that. And it of course is at this point where Jim comes into, Love-Struck Jim, I should mention, comes into the house, and of course, immediately starts wooing everybody over. Obviously, Love-Struck Jim is acting very, not very Jim-like. So Claire was, of course, immediately suspicious and wondering if something's happening and wrong. So, and of course they insist that, they do insist that Jim has just been acting, she admits that Jim is acting weird, but of course her mom, immediately takes a shine to Love-Struck Jim, who immediately butters her up, pointing out that he's happy to support an important pillar of the community, and she admits that Jim might have a future in politics, even though she's not talking to the real Jim, but that's beside the point. Meanwhile, the real Jim comes to the house with a bouquet of flowers. He helps himself to some guacamole and chips as he's walking through the kitchen, and in the process, he discovers Love-Struck Jim, and now panicking because he's realizing that there's two of him and there shouldn't be two of him. And of course Claire hears Jim panicking inside the house and is wondering what's going on. He proceeds to hide as well as he can away from Claire's parents, and while calling Blinky and proceeds to tell him what's going on. Of course, Arg is the one to actually pick up Blinky's phone. So when he hears a distressed Jim on the other end of the phone, he immediately hands it to Blinky, pointing out that the phone is probably for him. And of course, at this point and also I should mention, it's at some point Blinky did wind up getting his own cell phone so that Jim could keep in contact with him, which I do think is a fun little bit of world building. Obviously, as their two worlds have merged a little bit more and more, Blinky and the rest of the Team Trollhunters kind of gotten a little bit more, comfortable with human technology. Case in point, Blinky now has a cell phone when he didn't have one previously, which I find kind of interesting. But in any case, Blinky then proceeds to ask Jim what's going on, and Jim proceeds to explain that he's seeing another him. And of course, Blinky initially dismisses it, pointing out that obviously he believes that humans look very similar, but of course Jim insists that he doesn't really know what's going on. All he knows is that he does feel like there is a second him at the party, and also notes that never notice that his legs are so skinny, which of course causes Blinky to start racking his brain when he realizes that Jim is indeed telling the truth and is actually seeing himself, and wonders what exactly could be going on when he spies a stray gemstone on his workbench, and then it kind of clicks in his head of what might have happened with Jim, asking if Jim took the aspectus stone that Matrix the Many used out of his amulet. And of course, Jim proceeds to explain that no, he didn't, and proceeds to go and try and take it out, but discovers that it's stuck and won't come out. At which point, Blinky then proceeds to discover exactly what happened. According to Blinky, he starts to suspect that Matrix the Many, instead of using it to summon the strength of the thousands, like the actual legend, states, he actually used it to summon 1,000 of himself, which of course Jim becomes a little bit more distressed about, pointing out that he's not really looking forward to seeing 1,000 of himself running around, but he doesn't really have an opportunity to deal with it, because at that exact moment, the Councilwoman Yunez and her family proceed to bring Love-Struck Jim inside to, give him a tour of the house. So Jim is forced to run up to Claire's bedroom to finish the call, and then proceeds to tell Blinky that he needs to figure out how to deal with it. And of course, Blinky points out that likely he won't be able to take the gem out of the amulet until the clones have been returned. The clone has been returned to it. And in the meantime, he needs to figure out how to do that while Blinky researches the legend and figures out how to actually deal with Love-Struck Jim. And of course, with that, he hangs up. Meanwhile, Jim is forced to hide in Claire's bedroom. At which point, Love-Struck Jim comes in and expresses that it's it's a beautiful sight and he's happy to be there again. Well, with Claire correcting him that he hasn't technically been there yet, which to kind of hide the fact that Jim has been in her room previously. Of course, Councilwoman Yunez and Claire's father proceed to give him the rest of the tour. Meanwhile, Jim is insistent that that's the amulet's fault. He proceeds to pull it out of his pocket and demands that the amulet take the clone back and actually fix the problem. And pointing out that he's the troll hunter, it's supposed to listen to him. At which point, it summons another Jim, Hunter Jim, and this of course winds up causing Jim to become increasing more in distress, pointing out that he didn't actually want another Jim to come out of the amulet, but it's this point where Hunter Jim points out that he's obviously the troll hunter part of Jim, and explains that maybe troll hunter Jim is exactly what Jim needs right now. And of course, regular Jim is a little confused at how Hunter Jim can help him, but Hunter Jim demonstrates that he's extremely practical and pragmatic, and he's very dedicated to his role of being the troll hunter. So of course he admits that he's the perfect soldier for the mission, and he fully understands that the bigger issue with Love-Struck Jim is that he could potentially expose troll magics to the human world. So for that reason, he admits that they're going to need to figure out a way to capture him so that regular Jim can replace him, and figure out a way to detain him and figure out how to send it back to where he's to get rid of him. So of course, Jim realizes that that's actually a really good idea, pointing out that he's obviously not entirely sure how Hunter Jim is going to handle it, but Hunter Jim also admits that he's the most perfect soldier for the job and asks for the amulet, which Jim is initially hesitant to until he realizes that yes, Hunter Jim is in fact exactly what regular Jim does indeed need. So of course, Hunter Jim is handed the amulet, and is obviously it summons his armor in probably the most intense way possible, with Jim pointing out that he didn't know that he actually looks so cool summoning his armor, because he's never seen himself summon his armor before. He admits that it is indeed pretty cool. But in any case, the Hunter Jim proceeds to set off to do exactly what he said he would do with regular Jim. He detains Lovestruck Jim, who at this point is actually complimenting a tofu dog, much to Mr. Nunez's chagrin, until he's wind up being snatched up by Hunter Jim, and regular Jim replaces it and explains that he obviously smells the chorizo. He claims that that's not as delicious as the chorizo he smells, and of course this causes Mr. Nunez to realize that Jim has likely come to his senses, and immediately pulls him over to the grill to show him what else he's cooking. And meanwhile, Hunter Jim proceeds to tie Lovestruck Jim to a tree out of earshot from everybody else at the party. And of course, Lovestruck Jim is insistent that Hunter Jim let him go, pointing out that he needs to go find Claire. But of course, to this point where Hunter Jim points out that that's not going to happen, pointing out that he's a threat to the human world for the simple fact that he could expose troll magic to them. And he goes on to explain that he's to remain there until he and regular Jim figure out a way to get rid of him, essentially. And of course, this causes Lovestruck Jim to kind of realize that if they do mean to get rid of him, he needs to kind of point out that he knows that he's not going to be well contained, or that he's not entirely sure why they would want to get rid of him, and also pointing out that he obviously represents Lovestruck Jim obviously represents Jim's love of Claire, which causes Hunter Jim to maybe rethink his priorities a little bit. Pointing out that if Jim is obviously distracted by Claire, then it obviously means he's not focused on his troll hunting duties. Now realizing that Lovestruck Jim has a point, does decide to hear him out, at which point Lovestruck Jim continues, telling him that if Jim does wind up getting rid of Lovestruck Jim, it's only a matter of time before he gets rid of Hunter Jim as well, which and of course Hunter Jim decides to cut him loose, but in the process quickly discovers that his ability to absorb his duplicates back inside the amulet, and of course realizing that could pretend that he didn't mean to do that, but realizes that now he can. He proceeds to realize that that his priorities have changed, and he needs to figure out a way to help Jim with the whole duplicate thing. And it's at this point where Claire, of course, does ask Jim what's been going on, pointing out he's been acting strange, and of course, Jim admits that he's fine and that it's nothing for her to concern herself with. But it's this point where he sees Hunter Jim inside the house and excuses himself to go talk to him. And of course, Hunter Jim does proceed to tell regular Jim that he's succeeded in his mission and sent Lovestruck Jim back inside the amulet. And of course, regular Jim is happy about that, wondering how Hunter Jim did it, but of course admits that he doesn't feel that it doesn't really matter, but also points out that they had a bit of an interesting conversation, and tells regular Jim that he isn't focused enough on his duties as being a troll hunter. Pointing out that he's not going to be able to, that if he continues to let himself be distracted by things like girls and just about anything else, like that there's a very good possibility that he won't be able to maintain the balance between both worlds, and that he'll likely need to sever all ties with his loved ones, which of course Jim admits is completely preposterous, and does point out that that's not what he asked Hunter Jim to do. And of course, Hunter Jim points out that he has no choice, pointing out that obviously he's the troll hunter. But of course, regular Jim's insisting that he is the troll hunter, and that's obviously Hunter Jim is supposed to do what he says. But of course, Hunter Jim proceeds to pull out his sword and proceeds to tell regular Jim that he points out that that's not anymore, and points out that then proceeds to express his interest to absorb regular Jim inside the amulet, so that he is the one and only troll hunter. At which point Claire comes into the house and immediately realizes what's going on. Of course, Hunter Jim that immediately expresses his interest to break up with Claire then and there. Regular Claire is a little, Claire is very much confused about, and then realizes that the Jim in blue is the actual Jim. And of course, Hunter Jim proceeds to try and attack the both of them tries to absorb Jim back into the amulet, but of course Claire and Jim proceed to chase him off, and he proceeds to run out into the lawn. And of course Hunter Jim, realizing that did not work as he expected it to work, then realizes that he's going to need to figure out a way to, better formulate a plan so that he can actually deal with them. But pointing out that he's going to sever all ties, he's going to need some distractions. And sure enough, it's at this point where Claire and regular Jim realize that they need to figure out where Hunter Jim went and catch him. So they of course immediately run out into the party, and they see a Jim, but it turns out to not be Hunter Jim, but a new Jim, Wimpy Jim, which of course Claire shows visible confusion about, and after returning him back to her room, Jim realizing realizes that Hunter Jim must have created more clones of himself as a distraction, so they're going to need to find the other ones. So Claire proceeds to express her interest to do exactly that, and in the process we meet several other Jims. So first and foremost we meet Macho Jim, who wears red and also tries to try out for the wrestling team on the spot. In front of Coach Lawrence, who points out that the tryouts aren't for a while, and also when Jim when Macho Jim tries to demonstrate his abilities at wrestling, he points out that he's using illegal moves, and tells him to get away from him. At which point, Claire proceeds to bring Macho Jim back into the room, and at which point we also meet Grumpy Jim, who does not want to be there, and Claire takes full advantage of that to get him back into the room as well. And we also are introduced to We also are introduced to a couple of other gyms as well. But in total, we meet 8 gyms. We meet 7 different gyms. By the time Enrique comes in the room, they've collected all 7. And in that time, we've also meet Spanish Gym, Chef Gym. Spanish Gym. Well, we meet Spanish Gym, Chef Gym, Macho Gym, who we've already met. Wimpy Jim, who we've already met, and then we got regular Jim. Yeah, and then we're also missing Hunter Jim and Lovestruck Jim. That should be. The point is, there's 9 gyms, and I don't know all of them off the top of my head. So yeah, but in case they realizing they've rounded up 7 of the 9 gyms of the 8 gyms. Claire admits that she's getting a little bit sick of catching all the gyms, while Jim is admitting that he's getting a little bit sick of himself. Obviously, with 7 gyms, there's 7 other gyms, he's obviously very visibly, sick. But then they realize that they never actually caught, Hunter Jim yet. And sure enough, he appears at the worst possible time. So it's at this point where obviously Councilwoman Nunez appears and announces her interest in running for council again, and that she respects her votes to make her community as safe as possible. But at this point, where Hunter Jim appears and announces that she doesn't actually know what's out there, and that he can actually protect them from all the threats that are lurking in the shadows, and that maybe he should run for council. But of course, she admits that he can't. He's a minor. At which point, Claire proceeds to confront Hunter Jim and pulls him aside, pointing out that if you ask him what he thinks he's doing. At which point, Hunter Jim expresses that he's going to that he's trying to sever all ties, and of course, if she admits that she wants to break up, that they should do it inside, pointing out that there's some things she needs to say to him that can't be said in public. Which, of course, the two of them then proceed to go inside, at which point, regular Jim confronts Hunter Jim. And of course, Hunter Jim realizing that regular Jim's plan all along, then realizes that he couldn't let it go and admit that he's the far better troll hunter. At which point, Hunter Jim summons a daylight armor, putting Jim at a severe disadvantage. At which point, the two proceed to fight and climb all over the house to try and fight. And of course, Claire's parents by this point are a little annoyed with Jim because all of the different, because at this point they've met 9 different gyms, all of which have just kind of run amok. And and of course they proceed to pull. They proceed to climb all over meanwhile, Jim and Hunter Jim proceed to climb all over the house trying to fight. And it's this where Hunter Jim points out that obviously Jim can't protect them from everything. Insisting that if the Blood Goblins got out, that Gunmar also got out, and that Jim has ultimately failed and let Gunmar out, and that the only person who could save them is Hunter Jim. And of course, Jim proceeds to, and of course this is this point where Hunter Jim proceeds to point out that regular Jim is going to reside in the amulet, where with all the other weak parts of him. But of course, Jim proceeds to use the wind vein on top of the house to get the sword away from Hunter Jim, and telling regular Jim telling him that he can wield it as well. At which point they continue to fight and wrestle over daylight. But realizing that he can't beat Jim on his own, Hunter Jim on his own, Jim then proceeds to retreat to Claire's bedroom but of course, Hunter Jim not fully understanding what exactly is going on. And of course, he doesn't understand first, but does try to corner regular Jim and believes that it's not a fair fight. And of course, regular Jim proceeds to reveal that, yeah, it's not. At which point, he summons the remaining Jims, and they all gang up on Hunter Jim, with Hunter Jim wondering what exactly it is they think they're doing, and are insisting that they let him go, pointing out that they're going to be returned to the amulet as well. But of course, regular Jim points out that all of that's something that the rest of the Jims, aside from Hunter Jim, have ultimately realized. That they're strong. While they all make up their components, they're all strong. They're all stronger as one, and that they're all this, and that Jim is better than the sum of his parts, rather than all of his parts individually. But of course, this is this point where Hunter Jim insists that regular Jim can't do this, pointing out that while he maybe would go back to the amulet, he also insists that there will come a time when regular Jim won't be able to maintain the balance between both worlds, and when that happens, he'll realize that Hunter Jim was right all along. At which point, regular Jim proceeds to send them all back into the amulet. And with all of his clones have now returned to the amulet, Jim is able to remove the Expectus Stone from his amulet, while also insisting that that's going to take a lot of therapy to get over. And of course, this is where Claire proceeds to escort Jim out of the house, pointing out that obviously Claire's parents are not particularly fond of Jim after this whole event, and admits that she'll deal with him. With of course Jim pointing out that he's not entirely surprised that her parents hate him, but she proceeds to go on to explain that she didn't expect them to like her boyfriend, at which point she gives him a kiss and proceeds to close the door while she goes to deal with his parents. Meanwhile, Jim realizes now that Claire has officially called him her boyfriend, and now happy about the fact that they're official, he skips off into the sunset. So yeah, obviously this episode has a lot. This episode has a bit. Obviously we discussed that this one's a lot of fun to dissect, but let's go into the bigger thing about this one. Obviously, Hunter Jim expresses a lot of interesting ideas after he's released. Like, the entire thing that's obviously, Hunter Jim believes that regular Jim won't be able to maintain the balance between both worlds, and eventually there will come a point where Jim will need to choose one. And that winds up being interesting because that does wind up happening, sort of. We'll get to that later, but if I'm remembering correctly, but essentially Hunter Jim admits that regular Jim won't be able to maintain the balance of both worlds, and there does eventually come a point where that happens, where obviously the Eternal Night eventually happens, and when that happens, both worlds kind of sort of wind up being merged together. So it'll be interesting, but there is definitely going to be a somewhat lack of a balance. It's gonna be a little bit interesting going forward, but yeah, Jim is definitely going to struggle a little bit to maintain balance after a point, because obviously he can't keep them separate forever, because that's not gonna be great. So that'll definitely be interesting when the shoe drops. So yeah, Hunter Jim does bring up some interesting points in this episode that I do feel like I needed to go over. But also, of course, Gunmar is kind of just biding his time, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. That winds up becoming a major point in the episodes that'll follow. Because as I already explained, the Troll Tribunal kind of just lets Gunmar happen, and we'll get to that, because the episodes go into more detail about that. We'll get to that later. But in any case, that's gonna do it for my review. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below if you want to help support me. I would appreciate that. Please go check those out. Also, be sure to go and check out my Twitch. I would appreciate that as well. I stream Saturdays and Sundays over there, as well as over here. So please definitely go check those out if you have not. And it's mainly Twitch, because I'm very close to being able to hit Twitch affiliate over there, and I'll be able to monetize my stuff if you do that. So please go do that. I would appreciate that. And also, if you want to help support me even further, we have a Discord. If you guys want to absolutely go and hang out, I would recommend doing that. The link is, as always, is down in the description. Please go do that. And also, finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is the video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!